Well, friends, we begin our time together with a prayer from Stan McKay, Cree Elder, and the first Indigenous moderator of the United Church of Canada. Hear these words. Kitche Manitou, Great Spirit, with humility and thanksgiving, we come to this space tonight, acknowledging that we live on land that the elders called the Creator's resting place, Manitou Apa. We seek to understand the fullness of life, for each life is a gift for the community to share. Together, we share stories and dream of the mystery of all our relations. All our relations. Plant life, the ones that crawl, the ones that swim, and those that fly, the four-legged and the two-legged. All is sacred. The water is sacred. The earth is sacred. And we acknowledge that we are part of this earth, our mother. And we ask tonight only for what we need. And with the guidance of the Spirit Helper, we will share, even in this virtual circle, of what we have, our hearts, our minds, our spirit, together. Amen. Well, friends, tonight is a very special night for our Creator's Call Learning Series. We are privileged to have author and activist Sarah Augustine with us, engaging questions on the climate emergency and the interrelated paths of decarbonization and decolonization. Sarah, thank you so much for being here. We are so grateful for your presence, for your incredible work. And we hope that you'll come away from tonight encouraged by this community of friends who are longing to discern and to act on our part to address the ecological crisis in a good way. Well, as you all know, my name is Steve, and together with my co-host comrade Ian, we are glad to serve as your facilitators for this climate series on behalf of Mennonite Church Canada. Ian and I are so thankful for the faithfulness of everyone in this larger circle, showing up week in, week out, doing such vital reflection and homework together. And we pray that you'll be inspired and stirred by tonight's conversation. I'm confident you will be. And on that note, let me share how this evening will proceed. Sarah's going to share off the hop for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then Ian and I will engage Sarah in a series of questions based on the conversations that our group has explored through our different readings and our breakout groups and such. Now, if questions arise for you as this conversation goes along, you can note them in the chat and we'll take up some of those in our group discussion time. We'll engage Sarah until 8 p.m. Central Time. And then we'll break off into pairs for short conversations. And after that, come back to the larger group where we'll formally wrap things up at 8:30. I hope that plan resonates with you all. Now, in just a second, I'm going to hand it off to Ian to introduce Sarah. But as I do, I'm going to invite you all to open up your Zoom chat. And to get our energies flowing, I'm going to encourage you to write 1 or 2 words of reflection on the chapter that we all read from Sarah's book, a chapter titled, "We Don't Need Help, We Need Relatives." So what was something that stood out to you? Or what question did you come away with having read Sarah's teaching? And then we'll just let those words fill up the chat as we move along. And Sarah and you all, we can see the kinds of thoughts that are circulating in and among us. All right. Over to you, Ian.
Hello, so good to see you. Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks, and it feels really good to see you. And I confess to feeling a little emotional to be back in this conversation. So welcome, Sarah. Sarah Augustine is a Pueblo woman from the Tewa people. She lives with her family in the Yakima Valley in Washington. Even though I just learned she comes from what we call northern New Mexico, and she is the executive director of the Dispute Resolution Center of Yakima and Kittitas counties. She's a member of Seattle Mennonite Church. She's a co-founder of the Suriname Indigenous Health Fund and the Dismantling of the Doctrine of Discovery Coalition. And as we all know, she is the author of the book we read from, The Land is Not Empty, Following Jesus and Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery. I just met Sarah moments ago, I've already found her to be a warm and hospitable spirit. And I'm so glad, Sarah, that you are with us and chose to answer the call that Steve made to join in this conversation. For me, I found your chapter deeply soulful in its writing and also in how it connected with me as a reader. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. So I'm very, very much looking forward to more that you have to say now. And I hand it over to you.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you. And hello, it's a pleasure to see you all and to get to be in conversation with you this evening. And so I'm going to begin by introducing myself just one more time to say that I am a guest on the homeland of the Confederated Bands and Tribes of the Yakima Nation, which is where I live on the Yakima Indian Reservation in central Washington state. And I am a Tewa descendant, and I call myself a displaced person, which is to say an internal refugee, somebody who was displaced from my homeland within my country of the United States. So I was asked to talk a little bit about climate change this evening, and it's a big part of the work that we're engaged in the Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery Coalition, which is a national coalition in the United States with the aim of dismantling the doctrine of discovery. And of course, we hope to make that an international coalition. And climate change is a big part of our conversation, the way we spend time together, because a big part of our work is in challenging extractive industry, extraction and extractive industry. And so I'm gonna talk to you a little bit tonight about what I have learned from elders about the nature of reality. I want to start there with cosmology. What is the nature of reality after all? Before I do that, I want to tell you a story about something that happened when I first came to live here in the Yakima lands 15 years ago. I was invited, I was a faculty member at that time at the local college here on the reservation, and I was invited to a big to-do. I think it was like a ribbon cutting for a new building, and it was being named and so on. It was kind of a big howdy-do on the campus. And there was a tribal elder that was asked to speak there. And so he came in and he was quite dignified, tall, straight-backed fellow. And he came up to the podium and he introduced himself in Sahaptin, which is the native language here. And that's pretty common. People often do that. And he said a few things in Sahaptin to the crowds. It was maybe an auditorium full of people. And then he said a few more things in Sahaptin. And then he went on for 20 minutes in Sahaptin. He gave a speech in Sahaptin, the tribal language here. And then he said, thank you, and he sat down. That was a really impactful experience for me and an important piece of teaching. And I feel like over the years, each year I learned more about what he was telling me in that speech that he gave. Of course, I don't speak Sahaptin, and I had just come to Yakima area, so I didn't speak any Sahaptin at all. And, I would not say that I probably speak 3 words of Sahaptin now that I could recognize. So it was really a shocking experience. So I want to ask you to consider, what was he saying? What did he say? Of course, I know you don't speak Sahaptin too, but still, he was giving us some really very important instruction in that speech that he gave us. And so I'm going to let you sit with that. And now what I'm going to do is share my screen, and I'm going to talk to you about what I have learned from elders about the nature of reality. And so, and maybe we'll figure out together what that says about climate change. I don't in any way speak for all Indigenous peoples. I can only speak for myself, and I speak about what I have learned personally in my journey. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and now I'm also I'm slow at some of these things, so I appreciate your patience as I figure this all out. So now I'm going to make it a slideshow. There are some amazing colleagues that I know who are really good at graphics. So I appreciate your patience with me as I share with you some kind of basic elementary slides. I am not as gifted in that area. Oops, and I keep going off the slide. Okay, so here's a few things I've learned about reality from the elders that I've had the privilege of learning from. We live in a closed system of mutual dependence. Anybody in the room aware of systems theory or what systems are? So systems is a body of theory that really talks about how we live together and how we arrange ourselves. Of course, it's from the field of physics, but it is applied in a lot of different areas. And so I'm talking about it in the terms of maybe more of a social science lens, but anyhow, one thing we know about systems is that within any system, every part of it influences every other part. So if you mess with one part of a system, it impacts every other part of a system. So what I'm talking about in terms of a closed system, there are very few closed systems actually. The human body is not a closed system because it can interact with matter and energy outside itself. So when you eat, you're bringing something into the system. And when you are, driving your car, you are interacting with the system. But the earth is one thing that is a closed system. This is my understanding of reality. That is to say, there's no opportunity for new air or new water or new soil. It's closed. It's a closed system. You cannot find a technological fix to create new soil or new air or new water. It's closed. And impacting the soil system impacts air and water. When you impact water, it impacts air and soil and so on. In other words, all life. These things that I'm talking about are life support systems: soil, air, and water, the life support systems of Earth. And it's a closed system, which means we have what we have now. And it's a closed system of mutual dependence, which means that what one does impacts every other. So I grew up in a church that talked about people who were less fortunate than ourselves. So you would pack your bag and go on a trip to help the people that are less fortunate. What I've learned from my elders is that's really a strange idea. It's a fallacy, actually. In Steve's prayer, he was talking about, what Stan McKay calls the transversal relationship, or all of my relatives, right? That we are connected to all life. We're not separate from it. And when we are working with those people that are termed less fortunate, we're saving our own lives. And when we are addressing the destruction of what one mentor has taught me to call the standing green nation, the plant life that surrounds us, the animal life that surrounds us, we're protecting ourselves, right? Because we are, according to my vision of reality, what I've been taught is that we are mutually dependent. So we are living in a closed system of mutual dependence. So what I have learned and been taught is that this is not a point of view. This is reality. This is the reality that we live in with a capital R. This is the nature of our world. So now I'm going to share with you what I've learned from the dominant culture. I've learned from the dominant culture that progress is linear. So we are all in this big endeavor of progress, and progress is linear through time and evidenced by accumulation. So what is success through the lens of progress? Success is the accumulation of wealth and power. And let's see, I think I have one more down there. You can see it. Oh boy. Anyway, that we know that we are on the right track according to the dominant culture when we see the things that we've accumulated in time as progressive. That is to say, we've accumulated a lot of things. The other one I have down there is security, that we can somehow accumulate security. Of course, we know we're going to die, so I'm not sure how you accumulate that, but it is a project of accumulation and success. So in this view of reality, the earth is just a set of raw resources to extract in the service of progress, right? So we are going to extract these raw things to serve our progress. And of course, the end goal is perpetual growth. So extraction is rooted in the concept of domination. We're going to dominate this thing called the earth. And it's justified by this concept of perpetual growth. In order for us to be okay and for things to be good, we have to be in this process of perpetual growth. We want to grow cities, technology, manufacture, and we want to grow economically. And everything is open season in that project, that we are going to perpetually grow. And so extraction threatens every system of life, every life support system on Earth through the pollution of air, water, and soil. So those are the life support systems, but it actually endangers all life. So on one hand, you have this view that says we are empowered to dominate these systems. They are ours to exploit. And on the other side, you see this vision of reality that says you are stuck in a closed system, and that system is one of mutual dependence. So every action that's taken to dominate and to extract is damaging yourself and everything else, right? Because we are in a reality of mutual dependence. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the climate movement. So a big part of the climate movement is thinking that we're going to develop technologies to stop sort of to start carbon load, right? So a lot of the things that we're doing are saying, oh, we have to get carbon out of the air. And so we're going to develop technology to get us out of this climate mess. And so many renewable energy industries continue to follow extractive logic. So according to extractive logic, what is the goal? The goal is domination as the driver of progress, right? So accumulation and perpetual growth are still the desired outcomes. So tomorrow I'll be speaking at the Women in Renewable Energy Conference. It's a nationwide conference talking directly to the renewable energy sector. And my question for them is, do you have values that distinguish you from extractive industry? Because it is possible, or the carbon industry, because it is possible to use the logic of extraction to produce renewable energy, as you can see here. Look at these wind turbine blades. They are being buried at landfill. You know how big they are? They're enormous. I have a friend who works at a global wind company, and she was telling me about how they were dismantling a wind turbine. They only last 15 to 20 years, and they didn't want to have to carry it somewhere, so they just burned it. They burned it down right there. They just said, oh, we'll knock it down and burn it right here on this plot. So not sure what's renewable about that process. And my point is that as long as your vision of reality is rooted in domination, it doesn't matter what sort of the outputs are, if you want to talk in the language of a logic model, if your end goal remains domination and extraction. So this is my last slide here. So at the coalition, we have this two-tiered approach of action. And the first is to build collegiate relationship with First Peoples and Indigenous peoples. We stand together because our survival is interdependent, right? So as leaders, earth protectors, and experts in their own environments, Indigenous peoples must identify the outcomes that are appropriate in their own communities. And we assist as colleagues in the struggle. We are not helpers or service providers. We're colleagues, right? So we are partners, we are relatives together in the process of saving our own lives. And the second tier is that we take responsibility as North Americans. The systems built by our society that benefit us are our responsibility to dismantle. So we don't say, hey, Indigenous people, come be in charge of dismantling these systems that our society put in place. Instead, we say, for example, as Christians, we acknowledge the doctrine of discovery as a Christian concept of domination that threatens Indigenous peoples, their lands, and all of creation. It is our work to dismantle it. Why? Because it is the theological and moral justification for why this idea that extraction and domination is okay. It has to be dismantled, and it has to be dismantled by the people it serves. Must be. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share. And at this point, I want to ask you, you've had a chance to think about the story of the elder that I told you. What do you think was his message? What do you learn from that message from him?
Well, if you haven't already, feel free to throw in some answers, some ideas in the chat there.
Okay, so there are a couple of things I see here. I'm not here for you. It's not all about you. Thank you. That we are the visitors and he has something to say. Let's see. The importance of his language, surely. Words aren't always necessary. Boy, he said a lot of words. Exclusion and non-welcome, perhaps. The diversity of wisdom. I'd like to hear more about what you mean by that. So this one, if you can't speak my language, maybe you need to learn to know me and my people and my country before you bring me anything. Interesting. My voice is lasting. We have to learn to listen and understand his language and worldview to understand what he has to say. He is showing what it would be like to be talked to without knowing the language. Interesting. I appreciate all of those comments, and I will leave you with that. But one of the things that I'll tell you is that I just told that very story at a climate summit for Mennonite Church, the various institutions of the Mennonite Church in the United States. That happened a couple of weeks ago. And I told that story thinking about how I was the only Indigenous person there to talk about the climate. And that a lot of the language that I heard in that space was about reducing carbon. I didn't hear any conversation about the underlying worldview that results in systems of death. Systems of death that will destroy us all. And Steve was asking me, why do Indigenous people need to be involved in the conversation about climate? So I'll leave you that to ponder and think through. And conversations.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much for these words. And yes, and tapping us into a reality, a cosmology that speaks, maybe speaks freshly to us, something that's new for us, and there's a wholeness to it that reaches me. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have some questions. I guess the first question might be, so we've had a chance to read your chapter 5, which is we don't need helpers, we need relatives. And we've learned a great deal, and we've also learned something about you in that, especially in how you open up the chapter. You set a stage with your encounter with Stan McKay, and with that really remarkable image. I wonder if everyone remembers that image of you being a mother trying to solve a tangled ball of twine the size of a mountain, all in your spare time. I mean, yeah, that's an image that really speaks. So wondering how your ball of twine is doing these days. How is your work going with the doctrine of discovery, and how is it being received by our churches? But actually, I just want to be sure that everyone has also a clear, if you don't mind, has a clear idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about doctrine of discovery.
So I got distracted by a question there. Ian, do you want me to give you just a quick analysis of what the doctrine of discovery is?
Yeah, sure. Just a quick one. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, you bet. So the doctrine of discovery is a legal doctrine. I want to start there. It is a current legal doctrine in the United States that determines who has the right to own land. And so it's in the United States. It's also the foundation of land tenure in Canada and in New Zealand and in Australia and across what is termed the discovered world. So it is a legal doctrine that remains in place. It's also a theological doctrine. It came out of colonization. So it was from the very beginning, as colonization was beginning out of Europe. Europe had the technology to navigate across seas. And so the Catholic Church came up with a justification, theological and moral justification, for why European states would be able to go and own other lands that were inhabited by people. So in a nutshell, the idea is that with the coming of Christ, the church became God's covenantal chosen people. So that sort of mantle moved away from the children of Israel and was granted to Christians, who were then able to go and settle land in the name of Christ and to dominate them, and that God gave these states the authority to go do that. And so the people who were there were not considered the same as the human beings that came from Europe. And those lands that were inhabited by native people were considered empty of human beings. And so the last time it was tested in the Supreme Court in the United States was in 2005. And the majority opinion was written by US icon Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said that the United States has the ultimate authority because of the doctrine of discovery, which remains the law of the land. So all lands belong to the United States and not to Indigenous peoples. And that's it. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what the doctrine is.
Thank you. So so you spoke of all that work that you were doing with doctrine of discovery when you were talking to the Cree elder Stan McKay, and you spoke of the anger and the guilt of being away from your kid and the despair and all of those things, and this twine, this ball of twine. How is that work going, and what are you doing these days with your group, your coalition, and so on?
Yeah, sure. So we are a mainly volunteer coalition, and we have begun what's called a repair network. So our work is really located in congregations. So congregations join the repair network, and we help people at the congregational level to figure out how they're going to engage this work from their point of view in their own environment. We do have campaigns as well that we run with the coalition, and those are with Indigenous peoples. So right now we have two primary campaigns. One is with the Mayan people of the Yucatan Peninsula, who are fighting a legal battle right now with Monsanto and a variety of others who are using genetically modified organisms that are making it impossible for them to follow their life way of raising bees. And so you may have heard about this. The people that are using Monsanto products happen to be a colony of Mennonites in the Yucatan Peninsula. So we are working on a variety of different levels, building coalition in Europe and helping with the legal campaign in Mexico. And then also some of us are reaching out to Mennonite settlers in Mexico as well. So that's one campaign we're working on. Another campaign is with the Stronghold Apache at Standing Rock. So in the United States, the U.S. government during a military funding bill, there was a writer by what's his name? It'll come through in a minute. Anyway, a very powerful senator to concess land, the Apache stronghold land, to Rio Tinto, a foreign entity, so that they could do copper mining on those lands. And so we're also working with the Stronghold Apache. And so those are two current campaigns we have, and then we do a variety of other things. And we check out our website, which is at dofdmenno.org. We made a movie, we produced a play. These are education materials, a variety of resources, and so on. So there's an education component to what we do, to our own church membership. And then we also work in the movement for Indigenous liberation with Indigenous peoples. We have passed legislation at the national level, and we've worked within political parties as well. So we have a lot of things going on. It really is how the Spirit is moving the people who are active in the coalition. We're producing a board game right now, which I think is really interesting and exciting, because there are people on the coalition who want to produce a board game. So that's fabulous. We love that. There are all different kinds of creative ways. From our point of view, we're trying to change the culture, and we're trying to change the law.
Thank you, Steve.
Wow, that is brilliant and fantastic work that you and the Repair Network are doing. And I want to encourage folks to click on that link that we put in the chat there, so you can follow up and learn a bit more. Like, a lot of us in this circle are coming from communities and congregations. Some of us are actually leaders within those congregations, and this might be something that we want to figure out how to link arms with, because this work is best done together. Sarah, thanks for all that. Okay, couple other questions to put before you. As you know, this group study is all about the climate emergency, and confession, we're probably a group that's like you mentioned in your talk, is focused for the most part on decarbonization, and is we're figuring out, okay, how does this decolonization piece hold in, and how is it even, where does it fit? Is it central in this work? Some polls have recently come out saying that a majority of Canadians and Americans are currently concerned about climate change, many of them very concerned. And a lot of these folks are actively learning and organizing with others to do something about it. But as we know, a majority of the folks are not pairing that need for rapid decarbonization with that focus on decolonization and attention to Indigenous peoples' rights and leadership and priorities. So you spoke a bit about worldview as being one of the, probably the foundational reason for why these two concerns aren't linked. I'm wondering what else is at play in this. So is it a lack of education, or what other kind of barriers prevent us from connecting these concerns? Even when we do learn about this stuff, sometimes the church is not putting it together, right? So what prevents us from putting it together?
Yeah, I would say the process of colonization itself. So a big part of colonization is erasure, the denial of the existence of indigenous peoples. And we see that throughout, the way our textbooks are arranged. I just published an article and asked people in congregations to check in with their schools and find out how Native American people are portrayed in their school system, because I think that's really important. I mean, I remember being from New Mexico, which is considered a tricultural state. I mean, there's quite a number of natives there, and we had one chapter on Native history in our textbook. I think it was a history textbook, and it was about Plains Indians, which is kind of what everybody knows about, dances with wolves. So no real discussion of what self-determination is, or ceded territory or unceded territory. My people, the Pueblo people, never ceded their lands. And I didn't know that until I started studying the doctrine of discovery, with the differences. And so I think challenging that erasure is really important. Talking about Indigenous people's stories and building a relationship with Indigenous peoples, because I think we find that common cause when we relate to each other, in fact. And that process of colonization is not something that happened in the past. It's ongoing. And I'll tell you who knows it. Indigenous peoples know it, because they're experiencing that freight train right now. And so, for example, in Washington State, where I live as a guest, we have the cleanest energy source that there is, apparently, which is hydropower. So all energy from the grid comes from hydropower. People talk about how lovely that is. And it was based on the destruction of Celilo Falls, which was the center, the heart of the Yakima lifeway, which is to say commerce, economy, spirituality, and community. And Celilo Falls dammed the Columbia River, and it denies Indigenous peoples to this day access to a livelihood that they were guaranteed in the Treaty of 1855. So the fact that there's no discussion about that is erasure, just a complete denial of Indigenous reality. And so I think when people talk about renewable energy, the very first thing I want to talk about is colonization, because renewable for whom? I mean, what does that even mean? And then the other thing I'll say is, when you're talking about renewables, what I have learned in conversation with Indigenous peoples and with elders, there's a difference between something being renewable and something being replaceable. Solar panels are not renewable. They go in a landfill like everything else. They are replaceable, and they also require a massive amount of extraction and electric energy to produce them, right? So I'm not saying I'm against solar. I'm saying it's not a technological solution. What it is a new way to focus our energy in this big drive of accumulation. So in the worldview that I have been taught by Indigenous peoples, my job is to preserve the reality that I live in for the next generation, and to leave behind stories. That's my legacy, is my descendants and the stories that they remember about me. Not to create a big landfill full of stuff that's going to poison the opportunity for next generations to come behind me. So engaging in that conversation, opening our minds to conceive of a different cosmology, a different way of seeing the world. These are the ways that we start to confront colonization. But I think that begins with relationship.
As you're talking about the denial of an Indigenous reality, I am imagining the people around the circle here are going ding, 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 because this book that we've been reading, A Good War, talks about a great obstacle to us being able to get out of this climate crisis, a big obstacle is our denialism about what is happening in terms of how we've contributed to the problem. I don't know, Steve, I thought I'd skip ahead. I thought the topic of, you're talking about the falls and the hydropower. One of the things that pops out of the out of your chapter is when Stan McKay said, "Trust the water." And he did that when you were experiencing that anger and bewilderment and despair and so on. It was a healing thing. It was his calling for you to find healing. And they do speak to an inner ache, but it's something of a foreign idea. I'm not sure I know how to trust the water. And so how do we go about that? What have you learned about trusting the water?
Oh dear. Yeah, so I'll tell you some more story, and then we'll see if we can sort something out there. I went to my home place, that is to say, the place that my grandmother was born, and the place that she lived and walked, and the place where her son, my father, was removed from her. And I went into the water there and did ceremony there. And I did that with my son, actually, who was the little boy at that time. He's 13 now, but he was a little guy when we did that together. He was probably 3 or 4. And I went fully into the water. And, one of the things that a different mentor, Steve Darden, had told me is that when you pray there, you want to connect to the woman who lost her son, and really think about repairing that breach in the generations. What happened? This child was stolen away out of time, and connecting with her. That's something hard to understand, praying backwards. I don't know, Christians are, that's a hard idea. It was a hard idea for me, very important idea. Actually, if we believe that God exists in infinity, then that's possible to do, to pray backwards in time, because time is a construct. Anyway, maybe it isn't. I don't know. I'm just saying. Anyway, and so experiencing that healing there on that place, and experiencing also relation with that place, saying this, I have a relationship to this water. I have a relationship to this place. This is the place. This is sacred ground because my relatives are part of the soil, right? I don't mean in the cemetery. I mean, they've been there since the beginning of time. So in the Tewa creation story, the Tewa people come out of the earth. They come right up out of the earth. And then they've lived and died there for more generations than I can count. So they are there in that soil, and that is my homeland. And so understanding that that's my homeland, in the cosmology of that people and of many people in North America, women are the sacred protectors of the water. So that water is important. Why are the women the protectors of the water? Because women are the life givers. That's not to say men can't protect the water too, but this idea that this is my responsibility. What happens to this water is mine. And I'm alive now. So what happens here matters, and it's my job to care about it and to be a part of that. So I think trusting the water is recognizing I'm in relationship with this spirit thing, that this thing is not just a resource to be extracted or commodified. There is spirit in it. Also a difficult concept for Christians, difficult concept for me to internalize, that this thing is also of spirit. It's not inanimate, right? It is animate. It is part of the spirit of life. It is part of the creator, that thing. And I am in relationship with it, not in an abstract way, but in a real concrete here and now kind of way. I am responsible for this water. And that means I am responsible to be in conversation about what happens in this water, right? And to this water. And that I am taking that on as a relative, not as a helper, but that what happens to this water, my life depends on it. And so, and I take that very seriously about the water in the Yakima lands as well. This is where I've raised my son. I buried my son's umbilical cord in the land I live on right here. That's where he is from. This is his place that he lives. He is part of this people and part of our people. So what happens to the water where I live, it is my responsibility. I don't get to take a break from it. I don't get to take a vacation from it. It concerns me. It's mine to own. And it's my responsibility to be part of it because it is part of me. And so it's heavy. That's a lot. But I think, so thinking on that level, I think is not abstract in the way that it's not abstract. The way I make it not abstract is through ceremony, going into the water and acknowledging that in prayer. So people think ceremony is some kind of magical thing that we do. It's prayer. That's all it is. It's prayer. It's connecting with the Creator in that way, taking the time and the space to create that special space to do that. And so another story I'll tell you is a couple years ago, I don't know, maybe more than a few by now, I worked on locally, this dispute resolution center where I work. I brought civic leaders together to address missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I built coalition with Yakima people who were survivors of lost relatives. And we spent a year together trying to think through with civic leaders how to address that. And one of the things that was interesting, I took testimony from each of them. So they would come and talk and I would type, and we took these to a hearing with federal judges. And so the reason we typed up these manuscripts in advance is because it's very difficult to talk about the loss of your relative, what happened. And so we did that in advance, and I took the transcript as a peacemaker. It's one of the things I could do to accompaniment. And what I was so shocked by is all the stories of the people that were part of this began the story of the loss of their relative with the damming of Celilo Falls. Think on that. They didn't know each other in advance. And every one of them started that story with the damming of Celilo Falls. This is not an abstract thing that happened long ago. This is the removal of a people from the water that they depend on for their livelihood, for the heart of their spiritual and community life. That was so impactful for me to say, oh my gosh, this crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and men originates with the damming of these waters. Those waters are my concern, and it's the reason that I have partnered with Black Lives Matter and others across the state to preserve waters with multiple Indigenous tribes in the United States, or I'm sorry, in Washington State, because that's my work to do.
Thank you, Sarah. That is just profound. I think that story that you just shared illustrates that there really is a crisis of worldview at work here. People are seeing reality in very, very different ways. And just noting in the chat there how beautiful it is to see that we're part of this community of creation that is calling us into these responsibilities and relationships, right? So the water's inviting us to walk in a different way and relate in a different way. I've seen in the chat a couple requests for a question that Ian and I also want to bring to the table, and it's about this really interesting call that you put before the church in Reimagining Mission. It's found on page 115 of your book, where you say, we're not to send missionaries to Indigenous communities, but instead we should be sending them to the corporate and state powers that are dispossessing Indigenous peoples. And I just love the picture you describe about, there in a church foyer, we'd actually see photos of the missionaries that we sent, not to Papua New Guinea or not to Northern Native community, but to Bay Street, Wall Street, to Goldcorp Mining, or to the Royal Bank of Canada. Now, I think in this circle, there's probably a lot of people that resonate with that vision. And yet we know that our church institutions find such ideas so controversial. So my question is, why, and maybe this is going back to the worldview again, but why does the church find this so utterly revolutionary and scary as well? And how do we get to that place where we can actually do what you're talking about?
Yeah, so one thing I think has been really important, that's been a shift for me in the last 2 or 3 years, is really thinking through what church is. And I think we are the church, those of us assembled right here. We're them. We are where the Spirit is, the Spirit of life, the Spirit that gives us life and animates us, the great animator. That is where the church is. That's where we are. And our institutions are not us. They are not the church. They are institutions. And institutions are created and built according to laws that were created within a colonial identity and mindset, right? So, a shift that's been really important for me. I mean, I've been beating my head against the church institutions for, wow, a long time. And I think, gosh, we can do our own thing. And I think building the coalition was really important for that, to say, we don't need, all the stuff. We can be together and be the hands and feet of the great animator without institutions. And as institutions want to partner with us, we have that open door. We're ready to do that. And so, I think part of the reason the idea is controversial is because it is because colonization built the story around who needed saving. And I think if we're really talking about people whose mortal souls are in jeopardy, I think the people whose mortal souls are in jeopardy, if you believe in, immortal soul, and if you believe in, the hereafter, are the people who are at the pulling the levers of the systems of death. And, I think they need our help, and I think we should probably go work with them. And I think, there would be life there. And so I want to tell you another funny thing. You recorded this, Steve, so it's probably bad for me to say, but I am going to say it anyway. Strangely, I don't know why or how, but I am now on Mennonite Mission Network board. I don't know why. I think it's so funny. I just think that's so funny. I don't know who thought that would be a good idea. But anyway, I think it's a great idea. So I am excited to be on the board of the biggest mission agency in the United States. And I look forward to 3 years of having this conversation, because I really believe in it. And I know there are people on the coalition that are really excited about it. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I think it's got to happen, because we've got to, first of all, build a relationship with those people who are engaged in building the systems of death and administering the systems of death. And we need to share that information among ourselves. And we need to build allies within those systems. And we need to, take that seriously. And I think, we can, we have all these tactics for how we move forward movements. And I think this is an important one. I think this is one way. The church has been absolutely imperative in moving forward the project of colonization. And I think we can be imperative in the movement to dismantle it. So we're talking about it all the time. We're on the coalition. We're like, where will it go first? Who will we send? How will we pay them? We're not sure, but we feel like we can raise some money to send people to the principalities and powers. Join us. We'd love to partner with you. Maybe it could be you. Maybe one of you will go to Geneva or to Toronto or wherever. Yeah.
I love the call, and I appreciate you making the call and said, I'm serious. I'm serious. This isn't just a whimsical idea to suggest something. This is a calling.
It's not a metaphor.
It's not a metaphor. Do we have time for another question, Steve, or should we? Yeah. What do you think?
Go for it, Ian. If you got a question there.
No, if you have an idea, go for it. Go for it.
Well, I'm just curious, Sarah, back in 2018, I think you were a part of the Mennonite World Conference group that put together that statement, a declaration in solidarity with Indigenous peoples. Yeah. Okay. We're an ecumenical group here. So there's Anglicans, Catholics, United, Unitarian, and so on. But a lot of our groups, we write statements. And so many of the folks here, we've written statements in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en, with Lamback, 1492, with Mi'kmaq Fishers and all that. So I'm curious, to hear like what you think about, well, where has this statement gone? Because that statement that Mennonite World Conference put out was pretty powerful, and it says we're called to disarm the structures of oppression and so on. So I'm curious, has there been follow through on that? And what do you think, what is your challenge to those of us, so many of us, who are involved in statement writing?
Yeah, so I love that. Yeah, thank you. So that statement, there has been, let me tell you what the follow-up I've done. I did a workshop about it at a convention, and then the other follow-up has been, from my point of view, a lot of scolding, calling people and scolding the heck out of them on the phone and Zoom in various ways. Because from my point of view, I called this man and he said, well, the things you're talking about, we don't really do that. And I was like, change. Then it's time for you to change. So don't tell me you don't do it. I don't need your mandates thrown in my face. I understand about mandates. I hear it from the UN all the time. I hear it from the World Bank all the time. I understand how mandates work. And you, my friend, are the church. Who do you work for? If you're not willing to do it, don't write it down. Don't waste my time. And so I'm not afraid to say that. I say it loudly and all the time. I'm typically the bad cop that comes on the scene. My colleague Katerina is the good cop who goes and cleans it up. Because I feel like, you know what? Give me a break. Very rarely do I engage in writing statements. But when I do, there will be a follow-up with a demand for program and dollars to back it up. And so if you're going to write a statement, you can expect from me to get a demand for program and dollars to realize that, because the people whose lives are at stake do not care about your good intentions. And we're either with them because our survival depends on theirs, or we are wasting our time. And I'm with them. That's me. I'm there. That's me. I am doing it all the time. 365 days a year. I don't take a break from it. It's what I'm doing all the time. And it's not my paid job. I have a paid job. And guess what? In my paid job, I'm doing it there too. That's my life, is working on behalf for the liberation of Indigenous peoples. I don't expect it to be everybody's lives, but it is something that we do as an identity because we believe in the reality of transversalism, what Stan talks about, all my relatives. I live there. That is my life. And I am going to, if I have a partner who says you're going to do something, man, I'm going to follow up. So for those of you who are writing statements, because you believe in the integrity and the soul of your church, hold your church accountable. They agreed to it. Man, that's a contract in my mind. They have to follow through with it. And I do not want to hear from any administrator, well, we don't do that. Not on my watch. You're going to do it. And if you're not going to do it, then I want you to put, I've said this many times, I want you to put on your website, we think this is a good idea, but we have no intention of following through on it. Just put it up there, loud and proud. This is something we think is a good idea. We have no intention of ever realizing it. Baloney. If my survival depends on it, then I'm going to follow up. And I want to encourage you to follow up too. We can do it. I'm telling you, we are the church. And what I understand to be true is that God owns everything. So I don't need to be afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to say the hard word. Somebody asked me, hey, can we send Bill as a delegate to Mennonite World Conference this year? I'm like, you got it. I'm your Huckleberry. Send me. Guess what conversation we're going to have? It's not going to be pleasant. You're going to wish you sent Katerina. That's all I'm saying. You wrote a statement. My expectation is you're going to live it out. You're not living it out. I'm done with you. Serious. And I will write about it. I will publish about it. I will talk about it. Get your job done. Sorry.
Right on. Right on.
Yeah. I'm not leaving in peaceful ways. Oh dear.
It's beautiful. Thank you for speaking so truthfully into this space. And, more of us, we need to step up and demand that we are walking the talk and holding our institutions and our own communities and ourselves accountable to these big words that we put out there. So that's the message of the gospel, right? So thank you, Sarah.
I think it also, It also responds to Scott's question. I would love to hear more about how you mobilized all that energy. So yeah, I appreciate the urgency of this for you, and the urgency of it is something that we also heard from Seth Kleins, the author of the book we've been working on. He was with us last 2 weeks ago. And we can appreciate the urgency of this calling, whether it's for speaking for indigenous rights and a refusal of all forms of denialism. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the soulful writing, and also for your genuine and gracious response to our questions, and just your presence here has been very appreciated, and also for your talk. Thank you.
Yeah. It's so good to be together. If you don't mind, I'll take one more minute.
Go for it.
Say, I did not organize all these people to do all these things. I didn't at all. I responded to a call, and the Spirit of Life did that. The Spirit that lives with us and among us and moves between us and with us. Yes is what's required to say yes to that call. And then together, mutually, we do all kinds of fantastic things, bigger than we are. And that life is among us. That life is with us and among us. And if it's not reflected in our institutions, then we need new life. We need new ways to be together. And that is what we do. Why? We're alive now. We do it because we must show the ones that come after us what it means to be alive, what we can do with our brief lives together. Often I will say, God has a plan. It's expressed in creation. How will I spend my life? Will I spend my life in cooperation and collaboration with that plan, or will I waste it? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for communicating so truthfully to us tonight. And I think we've heard deep call out to deep tonight. So as a relative, thank you. Appreciate you.
Bye, everybody.
All right, Sarah's going